"Stop being so dramatic," my mom yelled as I clutched my chest. I was 19, sitting on the living room floor, and for a second I thought maybe she was right. Maybe I was being dramatic. My vision was blurry, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears, and my brother sat on the couch rolling his eyes like I was putting on a show for him. "He just wants attention," he said flatly, scrolling through his phone. "You always do this when people are finally having a good day." I wanted to yell at him, but it was like my voice got stuck halfway out of my throat. I remember staring at the carpet and thinking, if this is attention-seeking, why can't I breathe? My name is Evan, and I've always been the sensitive one in my family. At least, that's what they called me. My brother, Mason, is the golden child. Varsity soccer, top of his class, everybody's favorite. My parents live for bragging about him to their friends. I'm the one who got told to toughen up when I cried over my first breakup and got grounded for being lazy, when I was working late shifts at the grocery store and overslept the next morning. It was a Saturday afternoon, and we were supposed to be celebrating Mason getting accepted to his dream university. My parents threw a little party with family and neighbors. Cake, barbecue, the whole deal. I had spent the morning helping set up tables and carrying drinks outside, but when I went to grab a plate for myself, my dad told me to let Mason eat first. He's the reason we're all here. So I waited until the line cleared, sat down on the couch with my plate, and tried to stay out of the way. Then it happened. This weird, crushing pressure in my chest. I thought maybe it was just anxiety, since being in the middle of a celebration where no one seemed to notice I existed wasn't exactly relaxing. But the pain didn't stop. It got sharper, deeper, like someone had wrapped a belt around my ribs and was pulling tighter every second. "Mom," I managed to say, putting my plate down on the coffee table. "I think something's wrong." She barely looked up from her conversation with one of the neighbors. "What now, Evan?" she sighed. "I can't breathe right," I said, my voice shaking. That's when she snapped. "You're fine. You've been fine all day. Stop making everything about you. This is Mason's day." I don't know what scared me more, the pain or the fact that no one seemed to believe me. Mason actually laughed under his breath and said something about me being theatrical. I stumbled to the hallway, clutching my chest, and sat down because I thought I was going to pass out. My aunt finally noticed something was wrong and asked if I was okay. I couldn't even answer her. My hands were shaking, and sweat was running down my face. She crouched down, touched my forehead, and yelled for someone to call an ambulance. My mom rolled her eyes, but grabbed her phone anyway. When the paramedics arrived 5 minutes later, one of them knelt in front of me and checked my pulse. His face went pale instantly. "Get the stretcher," he shouted to his partner. And just like that, the entire room went silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me as they strapped me onto the stretcher, my mom standing frozen by the doorway, Mason holding his phone like he didn't know what to do. My heart was still racing, but now there was something else boiling inside me. Anger. That was the first time I realized how alone I really was in my own family. And as they wheeled me out the front door with half the neighborhood watching, all I could think was that I never wanted to feel this powerless again. The hospital kept me overnight for observation. Turned out it wasn't just anxiety, like my mom insisted. I had a heart arrhythmia that made my pulse shoot dangerously high. The doctor told me I was lucky someone had called when they did. If I'd passed out and gone untreated for too long, it could have been much worse. I expected my parents to be worried when they came to pick me up the next morning, maybe even a little apologetic. Instead, my mom walked into the room holding a paper cup of coffee like this was just a minor inconvenience. "Well," she said, glancing at her watch, "at least Mason's party wasn't completely ruined. Your aunt kept everyone entertained." I just stared at her, waiting for something, anything, that sounded like concern. My dad didn't say much either, just asked the doctor how much the ambulance ride was going to cost. On the drive home, Mason was in the back seat with me, tapping away on his phone, probably texting his friends about how dramatic I'd been. My mom turned to me at a red light and said, "You really have to stop scaring people like that, Evan. Do you know how stressful it was for me to make sure the food didn't go cold while the paramedics were in our living room?" "I could have," I started, but my throat tightened up. "I could have died," I finally said. She glanced at me through the rearview mirror. "Well, you didn't. So maybe next time, don't overreact and make everyone panic. You embarrassed yourself and us." I felt my jaw clench so hard it hurt. Mason snickered softly. When we got home, I thought I could at least relax, but my dad immediately told me to help clean up the backyard from yesterday. "You're fine now," he said, handing me a trash bag. No excuses. I was still dizzy from the medication they'd given me at the hospital, but I picked up plastic cups and plates anyway, just to avoid another argument. Every time I sat down to catch my breath, my mom would pop her head out the back door and say, "Don't just sit there, Evan. You didn't do much yesterday. Make yourself useful." That night, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. "He has to toughen up," my dad said. "If he acts like this in the real world, he's never going to make it. And we can't keep dealing with his health scares," my mom replied. "They're draining. Mason doesn't give us this kind of trouble." I remember lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, my chest still sore, and wondering how I had ended up as the family's punching bag. It wasn't just that they didn't care, it was that they seemed annoyed that I'd scared them. The days that followed felt worse than the arrhythmia itself. My mom started telling relatives the whole thing was just a panic attack, and that I played it up for attention. I heard her say it to my grandmother over the phone. Mason backed her up every time, laughing about how I collapsed because Mason got more attention. The worst was the next weekend. We had another family dinner. Apparently, my near-death experience hadn't slowed down their social calendar. When I got up from the table because I was feeling lightheaded, Mason said loudly, "Careful, guys, Evan might pass out again." Everyone laughed. I froze in the doorway. "Don't be so sensitive," my dad said when he saw my face. "He's just joking." But it didn't feel like a joke. It felt like a warning that no matter what happened to me, it would always be treated like a punchline. I started spending less time at home after that. I'd stay late at work, sit in my car at the park just to avoid walking through the front door. The more I pulled away, the more comments I got about being selfish or ungrateful. My mom said I was trying to make them feel guilty by staying out. I wasn't. Not yet, anyway. But somewhere deep down, I was starting to think about what it would take to make them realize I wasn't just the family's emotional punching bag. The breaking point came a few weeks later, on a night that should have been simple and quiet. I'd just come home from a late shift at the grocery store. It was close to midnight, and my chest was aching from standing on my feet all day. I walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of water, only to find my mom, dad, and Mason sitting around the table like they'd been waiting for me. "We need to talk," my dad said, his tone serious. My stomach dropped. "What did I do?" I asked cautiously. Mom sighed, folding her arms. "You didn't do anything, Evan. That's the problem. You need to start contributing more around here. We've decided that starting next month, you're going to pay rent if you want to keep living here." I blinked at them. "Rent? I'm working part-time and trying to save for school. You know that." Mason smirked. "Maybe if you stopped wasting money on snacks and random junk, you'd have enough." "I'm not wasting money," I said, heat rising in my face. "Everything I make goes to gas, food, and my school fund." Dad leaned back in his chair. "Then you'll just have to figure it out. You're almost 20. It's time to start acting like an adult. We're not going to coddle you forever." Coddle me? The word hit like a slap. They acted like I was some pampered kid living off their generosity, not the same person who had almost died in their living room less than a month ago. "What about Mason?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Is he paying rent?" "No," Mom said flatly. "Mason's focused on school right now. We don't want him distracted." I laughed, a short, bitter sound I barely recognized as my own. "So let me get this straight. I work, I buy my own food, I barely ask you for anything, and you still want me to pay you to live in the house I grew up in? You need to learn responsibility," Dad said, like he was reading from a parenting manual. Something inside me cracked right then. I thought about how I'd been the one mowing the lawn all summer, how I'd been helping with groceries when Mason refused to lift a finger, how I'd cleaned up after his graduation party while they were all cheering his name, and now they wanted more. I went to my room without another word, my pulse racing so hard I thought I might collapse again. I sat on my bed in the dark, staring at the wall, feeling this cold, sharp anger settle in my chest. 2 days later, I came home to find my bedroom door open. My laptop was gone. I panicked, thinking we'd been robbed, until I heard Mason laughing from the living room. He was showing my dad a video on my laptop, a private video I'd recorded weeks ago where I vented about feeling like no one in the family cared about me. "You really think we don't love you?" Mom said, standing behind them with her arms crossed. "Do you know how dramatic you sound? You went through my stuff?" I asked, my voice shaking. "You left it unlocked," Mason said smugly. If you didn't want anyone to see it, you shouldn't have recorded it. My ears were ringing. It wasn't just the invasion of privacy. It was the fact that they were laughing. My pain, my fear, my desperation, a punchline for their amusement. I walked past them without saying a word, grabbed my laptop out of Mason's hands, and went to my room. I locked the door and just sat there, staring at the screen, shaking so hard I could barely type as I changed every password I had. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat awake, listening to the muffled sound of my parents laughing at something on TV, and I made a quiet promise to myself. I would not give them another piece of me to break. And if they wanted to treat me like a burden, like a joke, then one day, I'd show them exactly what it felt like to be left behind. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like enemy territory, every room carrying some memory of being mocked, ignored, or dismissed. I stopped talking at dinner, stopped sharing anything about work, school, or my friends. It didn't matter what I said anyway. They'd always steer the conversation back to Mason's plans, Mason's grades, Mason's bright future. I became the shadow that moved around the edges of their perfect family picture. But the real blow came the next paycheck. I'd been saving every cent I could for community college, carefully setting money aside. When I logged into my account that Friday, half of it was gone. I thought it was a bank error at first, but then I saw the transfer. It had gone straight to my parents' joint account. I confronted my mom about it, my hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped my phone. "We told you," she said without an ounce of guilt. "Rent is due. We just took care of it for you this time." "That was my school money," I said, my voice breaking. "You just took it without asking? You should be grateful we're giving you a roof over your head," my dad said from the kitchen doorway. "You're not a kid anymore, Evan. Learn to pull your weight." I felt my chest tighten, not like before, not the medical kind, but the kind that made my throat ache and my eyes burn. I turned and walked straight to my room, closing the door quietly because if I slammed it, they'd just call me immature. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the empty spot in my bank account where months of work used to be. That was the lowest moment, realizing that nothing I did mattered, that I could work myself sick and they would still find a way to take from me. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't do anything that would give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I grabbed a notebook from my desk and started writing things down. What I made every paycheck, what I spent, how much I'd need to get my own place. I wrote down my work hours, and I started looking at job postings online for anything that paid better than the grocery store. If they wanted rent, fine, but I wouldn't let them steal my future out from under me. I started picking up extra shifts whenever I could, even if it meant coming home after midnight and leaving again before sunrise. My mom complained that she never saw me anymore, but I just nodded and said nothing. Mason called me the house ghost. Inside, though, something was shifting. Every time they laughed at me, every time they brushed me off, I felt less tied to that house, less guilty about the idea of leaving. It was quiet revenge at first, small acts of reclaiming control. I started locking my door religiously. I bought a small safe with a combination lock and kept my wallet, important papers, and flash drive inside. I stopped sharing any passwords or schedules. By the end of the month, I had almost replaced the money they'd taken from me. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. Tiny, but enough to keep me going. One night, after another long shift, I sat in my car in the driveway and didn't go inside right away. I just sat there in the dark, gripping the steering wheel, imagining what it would feel like to leave for good. Not to run away in anger, not to storm out and slam the door, but to leave on my own terms, quietly, calmly, in a way they wouldn't see coming. And the more I thought about it, the more certain I became that it wasn't just an idea anymore. It was a plan. The next few months became a blur of work, planning, and small, careful victories. I landed a second job at a local print shop, working mornings before my grocery store shifts. The pay wasn't glamorous, but the owner, Mr. Callahan, was the kind of person who noticed when you worked hard. After my first week, he gave me extra hours and let me train on the front desk instead of just stocking paper in the back. It was exhausting. There were days I barely slept more than a few hours, but every paycheck felt like a step closer to freedom. Watching the balance in my savings account climb again was the one thing that made the bone-deep fatigue worth it. I also started teaching myself skills that would make leaving easier. I watched videos about renting apartments, building credit, budgeting for utilities. I even started looking at online classes in graphic design, since I liked the work I was doing at the print shop. At home, I kept my mouth shut. I paid the rent without arguing, but every time I handed my parents that envelope, I reminded myself it was temporary. Mason kept teasing me, calling me the tenant, but I didn't rise to it. And that's what started to scare them, my silence. One evening, I came home from work and found my mom sitting on the couch with her arms crossed. "You've been acting strange lately," she said. "You barely talk to us. You're out of the house all the time." "I'm working," I said simply, setting down my bag. "You're avoiding us," she pressed. "If you have a problem with this family, you should say it to our faces instead of sulking." I just shrugged. Nothing to say. She didn't like that. Mom thrives on arguments. It gives her something to win. The fact that I wasn't giving her a fight seemed to frustrate her more than any shouting match could have. Mason, meanwhile, was starting to slip. He'd always been the star student, but now that he was at university, his grades weren't as perfect as before. He came home one weekend furious about getting a C on a paper, and my parents spent the whole dinner reassuring him that everyone struggles their first semester. Then they turned to me and asked if I could take on an extra share of chores since Mason has so much on his plate. I nodded, smiling just a little. Sure, because the truth was, I'd already started house hunting. I found a tiny studio apartment above a bakery a few towns over. It wasn't fancy, just one room with a kitchenette and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. But when I stood in the doorway and looked around, I could picture my things there. My life there. I didn't sign the lease right away. I wanted to be sure. So I went back to work, saved for another month, and kept building my cushion until I had enough to cover rent, deposit, and at least 3 months of expenses. The day I finally signed, I felt this quiet surge of power. Not loud, not triumphant, but steady, like something in my chest had finally clicked into place. At dinner that night, Mason made another one of his jokes about me, fainting if I had to carry anything heavier than a textbook. I just smiled, because I knew that in a few weeks, he'd be eating dinner at that table without me sitting across from him. And they wouldn't even see it coming. The lease was signed, the deposit was paid, and the key sat in my pocket like a secret no one could touch. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. But I didn't want to just leave quietly. Not anymore. I wanted them to understand what they had done, not just to notice my absence, but to feel it. To sit in that house and realize they had pushed me out, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of me for them to control. I didn't say a word to anyone about the apartment. I started moving my belongings little by little, packing only when I was sure no one was home. The safe with my documents went first, then my computer, then clothes, books, and the few personal things that actually mattered to me. Every trip to the new apartment felt like I was peeling another layer of myself out of that house. My room started to look emptier, but I made sure to keep it just messy enough that it didn't raise suspicion. The real turning point came one Saturday afternoon, when I stopped by the print shop on my day off. Mr. Callahan called me into the back office and handed me an envelope. "You've been putting in a lot of hours here," he said. "I know you mentioned wanting to take classes, so consider this a little head start." Inside was a bonus check, more money than I'd seen in one place at once. I thanked him, probably too many times, but when I walked out of the shop and sat in my car, I just stared at the check, stunned. This was it. This was the last piece I needed to cut ties without fear. I used part of the money to prepay my rent 2 months ahead. The rest went into furnishing the apartment. A bed, a second-hand desk, a chair. It wasn't much, but it was mine. At home, the atmosphere was shifting. My parents had started making more comments about my disappearing act. "Are you hiding something from us?" my mom asked one night after dinner. "No," I said, keeping my face carefully neutral. "You're too quiet," she pressed. "It feels like you're just waiting to pounce with some big announcement." I almost smiled at that, because she was half right. Mason had his own issues brewing. He'd just gotten into a fight with his professor over a late paper and spent the evening sulking, complaining that no one understood how hard he had it. My parents coddled him, made his favorite dinner, and told him they'd cover his textbooks next semester so he wouldn't be distracted by money. I sat there eating my food, silent, already calculating which night would be the last one I'd sit at that table. I didn't want to storm out or yell. That would give them a chance to play the victims. No, I wanted my absence to be the thing that haunted them. I started keeping my car gassed up, my bag packed with a few essentials, just in case the moment presented itself earlier than planned. And in the meantime, I kept acting normal. Well, normal enough to keep them from guessing what was coming. Because when I finally left, I wasn't just going to disappear. I was going to leave behind a silence so loud they wouldn't be able to ignore it. It happened on a Thursday night, almost by accident. I came home late from the print shop, exhausted but strangely calm. The house was quiet. No TV blaring, no Mason's music shaking the walls. My parents were in the kitchen talking softly, and for a moment I just stood in the entryway, listening to the sound of my own breathing. Something in me clicked. I walked straight to my room, shut the door, and looked around one last time. The bed was made, the shelves nearly empty, my clothes already gone except for a single jacket hanging in the closet. I opened my drawer, pulled out the last envelope of cash I'd been saving, and slid it under my pillow, my rent for the month. Then I took out a piece of paper and started writing. It wasn't angry or dramatic, no accusations, no yelling in ink. Just a single page, written in my neatest handwriting. I've paid my rent for this month in advance. After tonight, you won't have to worry about me pulling my weight anymore. Please don't contact me unless it's an emergency. I'm safe. I just can't live like this any longer. I folded the note and left it on the kitchen table, right next to the fruit bowl where I knew they couldn't miss it. Then I grabbed my bag, walked out to my car, and drove away without looking back. When I got to the apartment, I didn't even turn on the lights at first. I just stood in the middle of the room, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, feeling my chest rise and fall. I was free. The next morning, I woke up to 12 missed calls from my mom, 6 from my dad, and 3 texts from Mason that ranged from, "Where are you?" to "Are you serious right now?" I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I went about my day as usual. Went to work, had lunch, set up a small plant on the windowsill of my apartment. By the time I finally called my parents back that evening, they were frantic. "Evan, what do you think you're doing?" my mom demanded. "You can't just leave without telling us." "I did tell you," I said calmly. "There's a note on the table." "That's not the same thing," she snapped. "Do you have any idea how worried we've been?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "And that's how I felt every time I was sitting in that house, wondering if anyone cared what happened to me." Silence. For the first time in months, no one interrupted me, no one dismissed me, no one laughed. "I'm not coming back," I said finally. "I hope you understand why." I hung up before they could argue. It was the quietest kind of revenge. No shouting, no slammed doors, but it was exactly what I needed. I had left on my own terms, with my own money, and there was nothing they could take from me anymore. And judging by the next few texts I got from Mason, angry, confused, almost pleading, I knew it was working. They weren't laughing anymore. The first week after I left was quiet, almost eerily so. Then the calls started coming in earnest. First from my mom, then from my dad, and eventually from relatives I hadn't heard from in months. "Your parents are worried sick," my aunt said over the phone. "They said you ran away." "I didn't run away," I told her calmly. "I moved out." There's a difference. That seemed to spread through the family like wildfire, because the next day my mom sent me a text that was almost apologetic. Almost. "We just don't understand why you had to do this," she wrote. "If you felt so bad, you should have told us. We would have helped." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "I did tell you. You just called me dramatic." No response came after that. 2 weeks later, Mason called me out of the blue, which almost never happened unless he needed something. "Mom and Dad are losing it," he said, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "They keep saying the house feels empty. Dad even had to mow the lawn himself last weekend." I almost smiled at that. "You're the golden child," I said lightly. "Guess it's your turn to carry the weight." He didn't laugh. "Look, I know I was a jerk. I shouldn't have gone through your stuff. I thought it was funny at the time, but I guess it wasn't." That was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get from him, and it was enough for me to finally let go of the anger I'd been carrying. But I didn't go back. Months passed, and I kept building my life. The apartment slowly turned into a real home. Posters on the walls, my own dishes in the cabinets, a desk where I started doing freelance design work on the side. My savings grew, my health stabilized, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was steering my own life instead of being dragged along. One afternoon, I drove past my old neighborhood. The house was still there, still perfect and tidy on the outside, but I didn't stop. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a message from my mom. "We miss you." The house isn't the same without you. When you're ready, maybe we can talk. I put the phone down on the table and looked around my little apartment. The soft glow of the lamp, the plant on the windowsill, the quiet hum of my own space. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty about the silence. I texted back one line. I'm not coming back, but I hope you finally understand why. Then I turned off my phone, leaned back in my chair, and let the quiet fill the room. Not heavy this time, but peaceful. For the first time in my life, it was my silence, and it was exactly what I wanted.